Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Adult Education and Literacy Bidders Conference for this morning. My name is Brittany Boston, and I am with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support, and I will be facilitating this webinar for today. Before I hand it over to ICCB, I do want to take care of a few housekeeping items. As participants on today's call, you are in listen-only mode. However, we want to hear your comments, your questions, and there are a couple of ways that you can share those with us today. If you have a working microphone and you are confident in your microphone, you can use the raise hands feature on your GoToWebinar toolbar, and I will be able to unmute you and you can communicate with us that way. Or depending on the device that you are joining us with, you either have a questions or a chat box. And so throughout the presentation today, feel free to type in any comments or questions you have within that box. This webinar is also being recorded, and we will be sharing the recording with ICCB at a later date so they can post it to their website along with the slides and any resources needed. This is one of two duplicate sessions that we will be doing. We will be doing a similar session on Tuesday. So if you lose connection or want to join again on Tuesday or have someone else who would be interested in the information, we will be having a duplicate session on Tuesday. And so with that, I am going to hand it over to Kathy Olson-Tracy from ICCB.
Good morning, everybody. I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. I hope to do some high-level discussions about what this program is about and what this process looks like. So for today's goals, I want to provide an overview of the Adult Education and Literacy RFP process. We'll talk about the submittal process, and then I'll have time to address any of your applicant questions as we get through here. But everything that I'm going to be sharing with you today is fully available in a notice of funding opportunity located on our website. And all of the questions that are asked today will be added to an FAQ that will be posted online. Okay? So when you have questions, what I would like you to do is email Nora Rossman, and her email is on this slide. And again, this will be posted on our website. What Nora will do is compile any of these questions, and then we will update the FAQs often. So I encourage you, as you're working through this process, to keep revisiting the resources and tools we provided for you at our website so that you have everything you need, and then you can always see new questions that are being asked. Okay, so where are we going to start? We're going to start talking about funding. Go ahead. So for those of you who may be new to this process, there are multiple funding streams that come in for the AEL grant. There is the Adult Education and Literacy, that is Section 231 out of the WIOA legislation. We use federal basic, state basic, and performance funding for that particular stream. Adult Education in Correctional Institutions, that is Section 225 out of WIOA, and we use federal basic, state basic, and performance for that funding stream. There's also a funding stream that's available for Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education, that is Section 243, and there is a funding stream for federal IELCE money. You may apply for state basic, federal basic, and IELCE funding, and you may apply for IELCE funding independently of the other funding streams. That is up to you. Performance funding is only available for programs that have been prior funded from ICCB. So if you're a new program, the performance funding would not be something you could write for in the first year. Next slide. So how much do we have potentially available? And I say potentially because right now we don't have our final allocations. So we have for federal basic, which is inclusive of all AEL and correctional education, we have slightly over $16.5 million. For state basic, that is also inclusive of AEL and corrections, we have about $22.5 million. For IELCE, we have almost $3 million. And for state performance, slightly over $11 million. Our total estimate is $53,180,474. So this is what we think is we're going to have available to us. Of course, we can't guarantee that until we get our final allocations so that we know how to disseminate the funding. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk about program description and design. Okay, what are we here for? Next slide. Okay, so we are the Title II provider out of the Workforce and Innovation and Opportunities Act. This funding is specific and targeted to help adults become literate and obtain the skills necessary for employment and self-sufficiency. We are working towards helping students obtain a high school credential or a high school credential. And we're also looking at English language acquisition for the immigrants and individuals living in the state of Illinois who speak, who have English language acquisition needs. Okay. Next slide. Okay. So some of the key elements that are in the NOFO, we provide you with information about the background of what we're trying to do, the goals, the background, and our priorities. So right now there are 6 essential strategies identified in the State of Illinois Unified Plan. There are links to the state plan in our NOFO, and I encourage you as you're writing your application to review the tools and access the links we provided for you, because there's critical information in there as you can see what our priorities are over the next several years. So we're looking at the coordination of and demand-driven planning for state and regional levels. We want employer-driven regional sector initiatives. We want economic advancement for all of our populations through the career pathways. We want to focus on service integration. There are a lot of steps in our process as you write this out that you will see how all of these connect. We want to promote data-driven decision-making and advance public-private data infrastructure. Again, you will see these key elements throughout your process, and the NOFO has links to the plan where you can see in detail what all of these sections include. Next slide. Okay, paralleling with the state unified plan, the Illinois Adult Education has a strategic plan. These things build upon each other to reinforce the framework and the priorities that we have working for adult education and literacy. So there are 4 strategic plan goals. Again, there is a link in the NOFO that will get you to the entire strategic plan, and I encourage you to review that. We're looking at improving outcomes by scaling effective models. We're looking at post-secondary transitions and credential attainment. We're here to strengthen college and career readiness for our adult learners, and we want to develop long-term career pathway systems using enabling technologies. These are our priorities set.
Next slide, please. Kathy is having some technical difficulty. Program priority is to establish a career pathway system. Eligible institutions have to be able to demonstrate how they'll develop, enhance, and expand a career pathway system for adult learners. This is this is a requirement, so it's a must.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Kathy, you're back.
Sorry about that, guys. These are our priorities, and eligible institutions must demonstrate in your application how you're going to develop, enhance, and expand a career pathway system for your adult learners. You are required to include partnerships with our core partners, local workforce investment boards, employers, social service agencies, all of these support systems that are necessary for a comprehensive program. So you're also looking at career pathway programs that provide opportunities for transitions into post-secondary education. So again, as you're looking at what we've said so far, we are building off of the priorities identified in the Unified State Plan, scaling them off of what the ICCB strategic plan is, and encapsulating those into a comprehensive program for your adult learners so that we can make them move from low-skilled or basic skill deficient into sustainable employment, credential attainment, career pathways, and skill development. So those are our priorities. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk about who is an eligible provider, who is an eligible student, and this thing called demonstrated effectiveness. Go ahead. Okay, I'm not going to read all of this, but the eligible providers are listed in the NOFO. These are eligible providers for adult education and literacy services. So I would encourage you, if you're applying for this, to make sure you fit one of these categories. Next slide. Okay, as an eligible provider, I wanted to take a minute and talk about you can be a provider as a part of a consortium and a sub-grantee. There are two. You can write independently and be a single entity. You can develop a consortium plan, or you can work with other entities in your APC that can be a sub-grantee. So the consortium is a partnership between two or more programs in an APC, which provide all of the adult education services to eligible adult learners. One of the consortium entities is the fiscal agency and responsible for all reporting requirements. So the benefit of a consortium is that if you have some smaller programs and you are looking to get to the required number of students served, and I will get to that shortly, sometimes it makes sense to partner with other programs so that you can get to the required number of students served. So consortiums are really great to build programs together. A sub-grantee is an entity that provides a specific set of services for the AEL program. Okay, so perhaps you want to have a sub-grantee and they're only going to offer a specific set of classes. That's fine, you can work through that. But I will tell you that as part of the application process and as a part of your budget process, you must be clear on the roles other entities come in and how they have that. If you are writing this as a consortium, all of your consortium partners will be required to sign off on this, and you will be required to identify their roles and responsibilities within this consortium. Okay, next slide. Okay, demonstrated effectiveness. So this is an OCTAE priority, and an applicant must demonstrate effectiveness in serving the target populations. You will be required in your grant narrative to provide a summary of data on your prior record of improving skills of eligible individuals and outcomes. This is something that we will review, and we have made it possible for you to give us 3 years of data considering the fact that we are in a pandemic and last year's data and this year's data might be a little skewed because of the pandemic, that is taken into consideration. Okay. Next slide. Okay. Your priority populations. This is critical because this is one of the most common areas that we discuss often with many of our questions. Providers must serve low literacy adults, including students without a high school diploma, low skilled adults, English language learners. And again, I'm not going to read the entire thing, but as you can see, this is also in the NOFO. These are our priority populations. And individual eligibility for students is a student who has attained 16 years of age or older.
Kathy appears to have fallen out on us again. Just something I want to emphasize is keep in mind you do have individual eligibility for services. They have to be 16 years of age. They are not enrolled or required to be enrolled in secondary school. They are basic skills deficient, or I mean, they do not have a secondary school diploma or recognized equivalent, and they have not achieved an equivalent level of education, or it's an English language learner. Basically, they have to be 16 years of age without a high school credential, and if they do have a high school credential, they must be basic skills deficient. Next slide.
And I'm back.
Okay.
Required services and performance measures are what we're going to talk about next. And then I'm going to pause and hear if you have any questions so far. The required services are detailed in pages 6 and 7 of the NOFO. Okay, so I see a question come in. I will answer that in just a minute. There is required services and services for all students in your APC. So if your APC has a population of English language learners or a population specific targeted areas, you must have services that serve those students. Okay, so we also want to serve students most in need of our services. Programs must have 150 NRS reportable individuals at the end of the fiscal year. The services must be aligned with our WIOA local plans and one-stop partners, and use research-based instructional practices and activities aligned with the state standards. These are required, and we're going to go to the next slide for the rest of the required services. Okay, this is kind of important. I want everyone to see this. You must effectively incorporate technology and distance education into your programs. But if you looked at what we said at the beginning in the first couple of slides, the WIOA state plan and the ICCB state plan, one of the reasons that was so important to start with is because right now in the first year of your program, you will all be required to have one active bridge program. And in the continuation years for years 2 and 3, you will have to have at least one active bridge and at least one active IET ICAPS program. Okay, this is required. One of the things that the NOFO explains is that this year, per an OCTAE requirement, all of the RFPs will be read by a member of a local workforce board to check for alignment with your proposal and the local workforce needs. So we stressed that at the beginning, and we've talked about this throughout this presentation because that is our focus and our key priorities. The rest of our required services is well-trained instructors, coordinate with other services in your APC, maintain a high quality information management system, and consider local communities to be served, and make sure that you are serving the people in your community as defined by the index of needs. So I'm going to pause for a second, and I see a question that I want to address because it's tied to where we are, and then we're going to move on. There is a requirement for there to be 27% credential attainment demonstrated over the past 3 years. So we are working on putting a link up on with all of the other resources in where the NOFO is for you to access that data. If you look at where we're at, you can provide demonstrated effectiveness with self-recorded data if you have that, and we will have that information posted hopefully within a week. Okay, and I'm gonna move forward. I'm seeing some more questions coming in, and I will make sure I address all of them before the end of our meeting, okay? So for the continuation years, and as I was talking about what our required services are, if by the end of the first year you have not met the expectations of the required services, you will be required to submit a continuous improvement plan, potentially on what we call a watch or probation status. And continual funding in years 2 and 3 are based on meeting the expectations outlined in our required services. So this is an expectation. The provider manual, which is linked in all of the resources and in the NOFO, will provide you a great deal of information to understand what future expectations look like and how we handle watch and probation and all of the pieces that fall in with that. So again, we've taken a great deal of information and given you resources that you can have access to that will help you successfully write the RFP. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the performance measures are negotiated every 2 years between the ICCB and OCTAE. For FY22, the performance measures that we are required to meet as a state are based on employment 2nd quarter after exit, employment 4th quarter after exit, median earnings, credential attainment, and measurable skill gains. These targets will change for years 2 and 3 of the continuation plan, because again, that's when we will renegotiate our targets. OCTAE works on a continuous improvement model, so I would look for these to remain slightly stable or slightly increase as we move forward. Okay, next slide. Okay, eligible services and activities. So I think that this will tell you what activities can be tied to what funding stream and how your priorities can be set up. So let's look at the eligible services and activities. For Section 231, the adult education and literacy activities, you can use this funding for all of your adult education classes, basic skills classes, high school credential attainment instruction, bridge programs, all of that can be used. English language acquisition, all of these pieces can come out of Section 231 funding. Next slide. Section 225 funding. Again, I'm using the language that is in the WIOA plan, so you'll see the funding streams. This is correctional education. In order to access Section 225, we blend that with our overall federal and state basic allocations, but this money is targeted to carry out corrections education for institutionalized individuals. And within here, there is a breakout of all of the things that can be covered here. Okay, next slide. Finally, again, IELCE funding. The IELCE funding is a set aside, and it is required to have not only English language acquisition, it is also expected that there is a workplace literacy component and a way to move students forward into career pathways. You may apply for IELCE funding individually or with your entire grant. That is up to you. Next slide. Okay, I'm not going to read all of this to you. This is also in the NOFO, and it is sections 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4 in the NOFO. And it tells you what the restrictions are as far as funding. And we've cited kind of the code that tells us where those are from. And there are different restrictions from federal funds to state basic and state performance. So I would encourage you to, as you're building your budget out, to make sure that you look at these sections for funding restrictions. Next slide. Okay. When I was moving my slides around, I was going to have this by the funding. That's why I was a little surprised it wasn't there. I didn't move all my slides correctly. I'm sorry. So I want to talk about your area planning councils because this ties into a couple of questions that are coming in right now. And where I will tell you the area planning council is how we distribute funding, and there is an index of need that is created based on APCs, and we use that to allocate funding. Okay, I encourage you to look at that. And I encourage you to review the code that explains what your APC is in the legislative language. I'm going to come back to a couple of questions that I am seeing. I've seen two people ask if you can partner with other programs within your APC to provide an IET together. If you have a way to do this, we are very open to coordination of services. If you look at the goal of an APC and the goal of what we're trying to do, you are coordinating services within an APC so that you are not duplicating services. But what I will say is if you are going to do something like that, you're going to want to make sure there is equal access and service access and training access for all of your students. So you can, if you're going to collaborate, that is a coordination of service. You are able to do that, but I just consider access of service for all of your students. There is a question about getting credit for both students. I will table that question. Right now, that's not part of the RFP process, and that is a much bigger policy question. So I'm going to table that. But yes, there are ways for you guys to work out as you're planning this, how you're going to coordinate and how you're going to track your students. Okay. So there's the best answer I have for that policy question. Okay, there are questions about measurable skill gains being calculated and changes to the funding formula. There are not changes to the funding formula for this year. And measurable skill gains calculated is a very complicated conversation. So there are multiple pieces that go into that. The measurable skill gain for credential attainment, for education functioning level, and for employability. We do a statewide data match with many other institutions so that we can capture all of the students who have met those targets. And that is how we calculate that by a state. Okay, so that is where those numbers are calculated from. And for example, we will cross-match our data with Illinois Department of Employment to identify people who have a job. and employed second quarter and fourth quarter. We look at students who have transitioned into higher education, and then we get that credential attainment. We data match with people who have earned a high school credential. And then in our data collection system, you are tracking your education functioning levels. All of those come together to do MSGs. So it's not a very easy process to describe, but I will put in the resources how the tables are calculated in our reporting, so you can kind of see what that looks like. Rachel, what you're asking is a policy question, and that policy question, I will not have an answer to that in the short term prior to the submission of this grant. Okay, next slide. So let's talk about application and submission. Okay, this is important, guys. This is a competition this year, so application deadline. The application must be submitted via an email to iccb.submit.aelrfp@illinois.gov no later than 11:59 p.m. on May 7th. There are no extensions in the competition. This is very important. Another important tip, if you are submitting something via email, you will get a response of a receipt saying, yes, we do have this. If you do not have that receipt email, you want to follow up and make sure it's been received. If you submit your RFP in multiple emails, I've had that happen in the past, please put in the subject header, email 1 of 3, email 2 of 3, email 3 of 3, and make sure that you get a receipt for each submission piece. This is a competition. It is critical that you meet that deadline. We will not be able to submit anything or review anything later than that date. And it is important that you get the information. And Rachel, I'm going to answer your questions at the end when I take questions. Okay. And yes, there is a good a submission there, a good point. There is a signature page for the grant. It must be signed. We have set those up to allow for digital signatures. So I know many people are still working remote or may not be in office. So we have it set up for digital signatures. Okay. All right. Next slide. Okay, let's talk about the process. You must complete the pre-qualification under GATA. I had somebody reach out with a question about that. I'm still seeking the answer. And once I have the answer, I will have it put in the FAQ for everybody. You must respond to the request for proposal by the due date. You must include all of the required elements. And you must be meet all eligibility requirements. Okay, next slide. Okay, I'm going to highly encourage you to use Appendix H, the application checklist, when you're submitting this to make sure you have all of the attachments in your email. That cover page is what will be signed by your chief executive officer or college president or person who is eligible to sign for that. If you are a consortium, every consortium member will have to have a signature page, and that will require a description of all of the consortiums. Okay. There's a budget narrative. Within that budget narrative, there are a few pieces of information, but this also helps us see the 25% match requirement, the uniform grant budget document, the consortium application narrative and budget, if applicable. Those are tied to those consortium signature pages. other attachments, and these are all detailed out in the application package. Okay, next slide. Let's talk about the grant narrative. The grant narrative, section 1, is demonstrated effectiveness and past performance. So to the question that's in the chat, the data that we will upload is by program. So you'll be able to find out your program. The question that we have in there, if students who do not have a social security number, will they count towards this data? That probably will not happen. So when we're using data matching, one of the data indicators is an appropriate SSN. So we recognize that we lose a lot of our data matches based on a lack of a social security number, but that is how the data matching happens across systems. Okay, the partnerships and WIOA alignment are the second part. And remember, in the WIOA alignment, this grant will be read by people at your local workforce investment board to ensure alignment with what your local workforce needs are, and that is an OCTAE requirement. There is a program statement of need that will indicate the need of services. Program design. There's a section on recruitment and retention, instruction and assessment. All of these various pieces in here: contextualized instruction, bridge, and IET programs, data monitoring, support services, professional development, and correctional education, if applicable. If you are applying for the IELCE funding, okay, there are questions in that grant narrative that are specific for IELCE. You must answer all the IELCE questions if you are applying for the IELCE funding. Okay. Next slide. This year, there is a work plan that is also included. The work plan will be provided to your regional support upon funding, and you will work with your regional support to work through that plan throughout the year. It must be submitted for adult education and education and corrections. And if you are doing an IELCE program, you will also need a work plan for IELCE. It's important to know that these work plans will be a part of your continuation plans for years 2 and years 3. Okay, so the submission and process for the continuation plans will be built off of these work plans. Okay, so I'm getting questions about data. I am going to make sure I answer all of those. Okay. And the calculation for employment metric does not only include students with social security numbers. All of your students that you serve are a part of your denominator. So I'm going to put on the ICCB website with the NOFO a document that explains what goes into each of these tables so you can understand how we calculate this data. Okay. And I may have
Sorry, guys, I think we lost Kathy's audio again.
Let's move to the next slide while she's trying to reconnect. The review process. Next slide.
Okay.
She's back.
I'm back. So again, what I said before you lost, and I sincerely apologize for the quality of my internet today. It's a little hazy and foggy, and I think those clouds have done something to my internet. I sincerely apologize. Again, you will have a summary of this on the resources, and you will have the table for the NRS table, so we will show how we calculate data. So the rubric is very important. As you can see, the rubric talks about the Section 2 partnership and WIO alignment, and I will reiterate, read by your local workforce investment board. And I can go back to the work plan slide. Yes, if we can go back one slide, that would be wonderful. Okay, so your work plan is a document that will help you plan out how you are going to achieve the goals you set forward. So your plan, your program description is talking about all the different things you're going to do. How you're going to have a certain IET, you're going to have a certain bridge, you're going to have classes, here's your partnerships. The work plan is the operationalization of your RFP. How are you going to put it into action steps? What are you going to do each quarter of the year? Now, these are living documents, and you'll be working with your regional support to work through them through the year, but this will allow us a way to fully support you in your program design, and we'll be able to help you with this. And we'll talk about that again. So do you have any questions specifically about the work plan? And you do not only have to have one goal objective per area, because our programs are so comprehensive that, you know, you could have goals into raising the basic skill level and working with English language acquisition and meeting the competencies for your students and transitioning them into a bridge. And I mean, there's a very comprehensive program. This is your ability to kind of flesh out how you're going to operationalize this grant. That's what we're looking for here. And again, this will be what your regional support works off of for continued support throughout the year. For those of you who may be new to the process, every program is assigned a regional support staff from the ICCB as their contact to the agency. And your regional support works with you and ensures that you have all of the supports that you need to be able to do the work that you had set forth. This is how we're going to operationalize it. Yes, the work plan can be as expanded as long as you need it to be. This is your work plan, but again, we're looking for the operationalization, can't even say the word, of how you're going to do all the things that you set forth in your application. How are you going to do that? And that's what this piece is. Okay, next slide. So let's talk about the review process again. And the review process here, again, your LWIB will look at the WIOA alignment. So I cannot stress this enough to make sure that you're developing a program aligned with your local workforce. We're looking at your need statement, your program design, recruitment and retention. But if you look at our key areas, instruction and assessment and contextualized instruction bridge and IET programs. So we're really looking for a way for you to do some of this and focus on those priorities that we started the conversation with. There was a question in here that's tied to this, and I want to get back to it. About organizational charts. In the budget narrative, there will be a question about your organization and how you function and who does what. So there will be something in that. As you noticed, the budget is not scored. The budget is submitted and approved or not approved. This is because we have a post-allocation budget process. So what you write for may not be what is awarded. So we're accepting the budget as approved or not approved. It's turned in as a requirement. Upon funding, we will work with programs for a post-allocation budget. That is the one that we really need to work with. I am not implying that you should not put a great deal of effort into your planning with your budget, because we will be reading it and it will be approved or not approved. So you want to make sure that everything is as close to what you want your post-allocation budget to look like. But I had a question prior to these bidders conferences that I said I would address here. When you put your work plan together, and then if you are awarded funding, we will revisit that work plan with you so you can adjust some of those goals to meet the funding target. So let's say that you indicate that you're going to serve 500 students and your allocation is a little different than what you wrote for, and you determine we might need to revisit that number. You will work with your regional support upon funding to develop a realistic plan that you can work with to operationalize the actual grant. So I said the word right. Yay. Okay. Okay. Explain the post. When we look at the allocations of funding, when I talk about that index of need, we identified in the NOFO how much of the estimated funding that we will receive will be designated for a certain APC. It is driven by the index of need. Then the funding formula applies. The funding formula is explained in the Adult Education Provider Manual. Again, that link is for you in the NOFO. And once that funding formula is applied, that is how those determinations are made. The funding formula is equitable across the state, so that we can at least, and then we know that the index of need drives allocations to an area planning council, and then the funding formula helps us allocate to a specific program. So if you're looking for information on the funding formula, it is outlined in the provider manual. No, it is not at ICCB's discretion. The funding formula allocates the money. The funding formula is where that is driven to. We make no decisions on that. It is not up to our discretion and how that funding is allocated. We use the funding formula to make all of those determinations. And that funding formula and the index of need are determined. And then that is how the money is distributed. It has nothing to do with our discretion. We do not determine individual funding by program on anything other than the application of the funding formula. Okay, so I see a question about funding and the required number of services. I would encourage you, if you're looking at this, to look at possible development of consortiums within your APC if you're concerned about being a smaller program with the required service of 150 students. Okay, so I would encourage you to look at that. The operationalization of the work plan will help us see where you are at, and then we can provide you the supports necessary to help you. Okay. So we're looking at questions about correctional education, but unable to implement services because of COVID. You know, right now I don't have clear answers for COVID. So I'm going to encourage programs to write for everything they believe they can serve in FY22, for everything that they believe that they can meet those, whether it's corrections in your local community jail, or whether however that works. I would encourage you to consider that. and then we can work with you on strategies for distance learning and corrections or something like that. That's what your regional support will help you with. And then we will work through FY22 as best we can together. None of us know where this COVID is going to take us in FY22, so we'll do our best. Performance funding is not a part of index of need. Again, there is a calculation and formula for that. So that is provided in the technical appendix when that money is allocated. So you will see how that works out. But that is not a part of the index of need. And again, there is a formula for that. So that is not at ICCB's discretion. We work diligently to be equitable across all of our providers and use solid data and solid data and reporting and funding formulas to allocate the money. So next slide, please. Okay, so we are at the question stage of this, and I'm going to apologize for my internet. I think on Tuesday I'm just going to call in, so you don't have to worry about my freezing. I think so far I'm going to scan these questions, and I'm going to see if I've missed any, but this is a time to put some questions in or raise your hand, and we will ask questions. It's important to type the questions in the chat as well as ask them, so I have a written record of that, and then I can actually make sure that I address all of these in the FAQs. And I apologize for my frustration. A minute ago, I thought I lost you guys again.
Kathy, I'm unable. I have a question but I can't type it into the question. It only turns into an answer. But I do have a question. The pre-qualification, does that have to be done prior to even being considered for the grant?
I'm pausing and thinking through this. In the past, we have required the pre-qualifications upon funding. Is that accurate?
The reason I'm asking is I'm vaguely remembering reading the NOFO and thinking that that was made now a requirement for being eligible to be read. So we can clarify that for an FAQ page.
But yes, right now, and that is a pre-qualification. And I will clarify exactly when that needs to happen in the FAQ.
And I do have another question that came up. I've been writing them down, and Brittany or somebody can mark this. The budget that you are including with the application, that particular budget that is being included with your application does not need to be signed, as it is part of your application process. The only budget that would need to be signed would be the actual post-allocation budget if you are awarded a grant. But the budget that's coming with the application package does not need to be signed, as it's part of the overall package.
Okay. All right. And then, okay, so the last thing I will say, other than another apology for my frustration, is there's a question about returning funds. If a program has to return funds this year due to the COVID, will that weigh against you next year? No. If you look at the scoring rubric, that there is no, the scoring rubric is pretty clear in the narrative. We're not looking at budgets as a part of the scoring rubric. So no, that will not be a part held against you. I would say the projected total funds appear to be level compared to last year. I don't expect any sudden surprises, but I'm using the term estimated and projected because we do not yet have our final allocations, but it's pretty level compared to prior years. Okay, so I want to clarify, students without social security numbers are considered in NRS level gains with pre and post testing. That's where we're going to capture those gains. Okay. That's how we're going to capture them. So if you have a lot of students who lack a social security number, we want to make sure all of our students are pre and post tested. We absolutely want to make sure we strive to do that, but that's where your measurable skill gains, education functioning level will happen, and we can showcase those targets. And Rachel, I do understand the difficulty in meeting of performance measures. So that's where you will get the performance metrics when you have that pre and post testing done. We will hope, our plan is to allow for allocations and estimate award date by July 1st at the latest. Again, that relies on a state budget being in place, our understanding of where we are with our allocations, but it is our intent to have that information out to everybody by the beginning of the year. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions in here, but I'm going to stick around as long as there are questions coming. Your professional development is a forward-looking plan. So we're looking at what you need. Again, the professional development is it's twofold. We are guaranteeing that we have a highly trained staff at each facility in the areas, and we're looking at what your training needs are and how you're planning on reaching those highly skilled staff. Okay, I'm going to go to, hold on. Is the policy still in place that if a student doesn't tape at ASE High, their adult diploma? Okay, the question is the policy still in place that if a student doesn't tape at ASE High, their adult diploma will not count? That is incorrect. It does count. It did count last year. It counts this year. It will count next year. So it does count. Now, I want to clarify that, yes, you're going to get that match when we do our data collection match, and that student is going to be counted, and you're going to have that as an outcome. But again, what we're here for is to ensure that our students can transition into higher education, post-secondary education and training. So we want to make sure that our students are training and achieving the highest academic skills, and they should be at an ASE High when they leave your program. That is, again, that building up of that student's basic skills. But again, if a student does get their high school credential, yes, that counts. No, in the section 7.2 and 7.8 of the narrative, there is a sample table. You can expand that as big as you want that to be and clarify what you're working within. Many programs are going to propose more than one career cluster, so you can expand those tables as long as you want them to be. Michael, there's a question about partnering with another ICCB funded program in a different APC to do an IET. And that's a policy question. I will need time to think through that, but more than likely the answer is going to be no, because the funding is allocated by APC to serve the students that are the most at need within that particular APC. So to take that funding and serve students in a different APC would be against our policy. So I understand what you're thinking, and we can have an individual conversation after the competition in the planning stages. If a program is to receive funding, we can talk about that, but right now that would not be something we would okay. You are either if you are a consortium, okay, if you are applying for your own APC, you are either a single provider or a consortium or a sub-grantee. It is possible to be, if your services are in a second APC, to work in consortiums with another APC. But here's the thing, you must have an existing program in a different APC. You cannot just serve people in different districts. You must serve in districts where you have an APC. The page limit is 25 pages. I apologize for that typo. We were doing it originally at 20, but looked at the size of many of the tables that you may want to include, and I didn't want to take away your space to be able to clearly explain what you're doing. So we changed that to 25 pages, and I must not have hit that in both places. So you do have 25 pages maximum, because again, I wanted you to have space to insert tables. Yes, for the consortium, all consortium partners need to provide some form of demonstrated effectiveness. And that's what we will review. There is in the pages, there is a consortium signature page. There is a space for a paragraph in there with a designated question about how they're going to do that. In your narrative, you're going to want to address how your consortiums have met that demonstrated effective, partners have met that demonstrated effectiveness. Okay, guys, again, I'm going to hang on for any questions, but the PDF for the bidders conference and the webinars will be posted with all of the other NOFO and FAQ sections on that grant page on the ICCB website. So you will have access to all of this. I'm going to be writing out answers to all of these questions. I will do that after Tuesday's bidders conference so that I can combine all the questions, and that will be posted by the end of next week at the latest, and you will have a written answer to all of these questions. Okay, again, I'm seeing questions about how both providers, if partnerships are formed, both providers get credit for the student. Right now, our current policy does not support that. I'm not saying future policy changes are not in place, but for today and for planning purposes for right now, you know, what could happen is one program serves the bridge contextualized course, the other program serves the adult education component, and together you serve the credential attainment, and then you each have your credit because the student is in one class that you each support. I mean, that's just a brainstorm idea, but right now there is not a current policy that adheres to what you're asking. I'm not saying it won't change. I'm saying it doesn't exist as of today. Okay, I got a lot of quiet. Does anybody want to raise their hand, or does anybody have any more questions? So for the RFP process, you're going to want to write your plan and how you think you're going to achieve this and what partners you're going to bring in. Okay. What we're talking about now is who's going to get credit for what is really kind of a part of operationalizing the grant, and we can work and support you upon funding. But right now, yes, if you have a way to partner with agencies, build that into your plan. We'll talk about how that could possibly change in policy, but that is not the way our policy stands at the time for writing this grant. And I understand your concerns, I recognize them, but to be very fair to where we are, I don't know when and if that policy will change in the first year of this. So you need to think through how you can operationalize your plan. And if a partnership makes sense, you're going to want to partner with programs, and we'll worry about how things are counted and tracked next year. I know it's not a fair answer, but it's the best answer I have for a policy related question. Okay, guys. Anything more? The funny part is I don't know if I'm frozen again or if there are no questions.
We did have one more come through, Kathy.
Okay.
How can we ensure that the expectations from Octave can be made realistic for programs on the ground? Are programs part of conversations with how ICCB negotiates with Octave for the RFP?
The process for the negotiation with Octave is that we look at our data for the past several years. They pull up that data, they look at what that process is, they apply a statistical adjustment model to that data to look at where we should move forward with the continuous improvement plan and determine our benchmarks. That is the negotiation process. So this is something that happens every 2 years. And it's really kind of what they set for us based on that continuous improvement model. So we discuss with them what we feel is realistic. They look at the numbers, the data, the statistical adjustment. They come back with what they think is expected, and that's where we land. It's a complicated process based on all of our data. So when as you look at the RFP, you're going to see a point in there about data and how you are to operationalize and ensure data quality. One of the key areas is everything that we do outside of here on that negotiation process, everything that we do on all of this is tied to the data we have available. So we are looking for a very clear data process, data management at each program so that we can move forward. And that's how programs can help us with this process, is by providing the most accurate data available. There are no consequences for not meeting generation this year for the competitive grant. We recognize that we are still in the middle of a pandemic. Although there is light at the end of this tunnel, that has no bearing. Again, if you look at the key areas on what we're scoring this grant based on your proposal for services. How are you going to serve your students? And you'll notice the budget is not scored. And you'll notice that some of the other areas demonstrated effectiveness are lowest scored because we recognize the problems that programs have had in the past year and a half. For the narrative questions, it is fine to be brief. I'm going to ask you to be as clear as you can on how you're addressing those areas. But yes, you can write those sections to the length and brevity that you choose.
So Kathy, we did have a question come in about the rubric and where that's located and if programs would be able to access that. But unfortunately, I think we might have lost Kathy here. So let's give her 1 second to reconnect and we will get that question answered for everyone. Do we have you back, Kathy?
You have me back now. The rubric is located in the NOFO. So it will tell you what the scoring criteria are for all of the sections. Okay, let me clarify that. The scoring is in all of the, so you know how many points are available for each section. That is what we provide for you in the NOFO. Programs are asking if you haven't met one of the past effectiveness requirements. Yes, you will still be eligible for funding. What you need to do in that demonstrated effectiveness section is to clarify to the best of your ability what you have been able to accomplish and how you've been able to do that. Okay, so there is, and for the grant purpose, we're only looking at credential attainment and MSGs, like education functioning level. So just do the best you can on that section. I recognize, we all recognize the impact of the last year and a half. Okay. I'm getting a lot of quiet now. People are stepping off. So again, I'm here to answer questions. They will be summarized. If you feel like your questions have been answered, feel free to sign off. This will be recorded and posted on our website so you can hear all of it. The FAQs will be provided. But again, I will stick around for a little bit longer if we have any more questions.